Chapter 9. The State and Incarnation. One of the most moving of accounts in Scripture is the healing of the blind. We have only to imagine ourselves as suddenly sightless to understand the great joy of those whom Christ healed. This facts point up all the more the sorry fact of healthy men with good eyesight who refuse to see. For quote-unquote Christians to be willfully blind is to deny their salvation. This blindness of the church is, however, a sad and prevalent fact. All too many churchmen are so willfully blind that they would refuse to recognize Satan unless he came to them clearly labeled so, and then they would raise questions about truth and labeling. Confronted with Christ, they would demand an inspection of credentials and ask for letters of reference. The vision of such churchmen is limited to matters of irrelevance. If this were not so, the Church would long before this have recognized the basic fact of the modern age, namely that humanism has a doctrine of incarnation and the state is the incarnation of its God. This thinking is not new. It had its classical expression in Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, 1770 to 1831. All political thinking since then has been Hegelian to some degree. While many of his heirs reject him because of differing stresses, they still think in terms of Hegelian presuppositions. For Hegel, quote, reason is the sovereign of the world, end quote. Reason, quote, is substance as well as infinite power, end quote. Moreover, quote, reason is the substance of the universe, viz., that by which and in which all reality has its being and its subsistence, end quote. And it is also, quote, the infinite energy of the universe. It is the infinite complex of things, their entire essence and truth, end quote. In brief, reason, the immanent reason in all being, is Hegel's God. Like the Greeks, Hegel divided the universe into mind or reason and matter. He then introduced the concept of spirit as opposed to matter. Spirit is self-contained existence, whereas matter has its essence outside of itself. It is clear that spirit or mind is very similar to reason or identical with it. However, Hegel gives a quote-unquote higher definition of spirit or reason. It is quote-unquote freedom. Quote, for if I am dependent, my being is referred to something else which I am not. I cannot exist independently of something external. I am free, on the contrary, when my existence depends upon myself. This self-contained existence of spirit is none other than self-consciousness, consciousness of one's own being, end quote. If this brings us close to home, that is, to man, it is by intent. Hegel said, quote, the absolute object, truth, is spirit, and as man himself is spirit, he is present, is mirrored to himself in that object, and thus in his being. But in order that the objectivity of essential being may be done away with, and spirit be no longer alien to itself, may be with itself, self-harmonized, the naturalness of spirit must be removed so that the alien element may be destroyed and the reconciliation of spirit be accomplished, end quote. The incarnation of Christ for Hegel meant that, quote, self-consciousness had reached the phases of development, momente, whose resultant constitutes the idea of spirit, and had come to feel the necessity of comprehending those phases absolutely, end quote. Since spirit is mind and freedom, all men can thus become incarnations thereof. The man who follows reason divorces himself from traditional religions and thereby asserts his freedom, and is the man in whom spirit is manifested. Hegel thus clearly had a high opinion of modern science and helped create it, that is, the environment of autonomous man as judge over all things. Hegel, on January the 23rd, 1807, wrote to C.J. Zellerman saying, quote, science alone is the theodicy, end quote. If science is the theodicy justifying the ways of God to men, who is the God? We have seen that for Hegel, man can make himself into an incarnation of spirit or God, although for him God is more than man. Quote, man, on the contrary, is God only insofar as he annuls the merely natural and limited in his spirit and elevates himself to God. That is to say, it is obligatory on him who is a partaker of the truth and knows that he himself is a constituent moment of the divine idea to give up his merely natural being, for the natural is the unspiritual. End quote. Man thus is only a moment in the divine idea. Quote, the shape which the perfect embodiment of spirit assumes, end quote, is, quote, the state, end quote. The state is thus the incarnation of the divine idea, spirit, or freedom. Earlier, Rousseau had identified freedom with the will of the state. Hegel did likewise. Quote, for truth is the unity of the universal and subjective will, and the universal is to be found in the state, in its laws, its universal and rational arrangements. The state is the divine ideal as it exists on earth. We have in it, therefore, the object of history in a more definite shape than before, that in which freedom obtains objectivity and lives in the enjoyment of this objectivity. For law is the objectivity of spirit, volition in its true form. Only that will which obeys law is free, for it obeys itself. It is independent and so free. When a state or our country constitute a community of existence, when the subjective will of man submits to laws, the contradiction between liberty and necessity vanishes. The rational has necessary existence as being the reality and substance of things, and we are free in recognizing it as law and following it as the substance of our own being. The objective and the subjective will are then reconciled and present one identical homogeneous whole. For the morality, Sittlichkeit of the state is not of that ethical, moralische, reflective kind in which one's own conviction bears sway. This latter is rather the peculiarity of the modern time, while the true antique morality is based on the principle of abiding by one's duty to the state at large. An Athenian citizen did what was required of him, as it were from instinct, but if I reflect on the object of my activity, I must have the consciousness that my will has been called into exercise, but morality is duty. Substantial right, a quote, second nature, end quote, as it has been justly called, for the first nature of man is his primary, merely animal existence, end quote. Note the following points which Hegel makes. First, his model is Athens and Greece, not Christ and the Bible. He wants, quote, the true antique morality of paganism. Second, quote, the state is the divine idea as it exists on earth, end quote. That is, it is the current incarnation of Hegel's God. Third, since by definition God is ultimate and God's will is just and holy, for Hegel it follows that the state is as infallible as Orthodox Christians believe Christ and the Bible are. The state's law objectifies or manifests in incarnate written form the spirit of Hegel's God. Fourth, men cannot be free in their personal religious morality, which Hegel dismisses as, quote, the peculiarity of the modern time, end quote, that is, of the Christian era. Quote, only that will which obeys law is free, end quote. And for Hegel, law means status law, not the personal and peculiar biblical morality and law. Very clearly, Hegel's thinking here was the foundation for the Marxist, infallible dictatorship of the proletariat. The scientific socialist state is by definition the historical incarnation of freedom and reason, and can thus do no wrong. Man cannot be free if he challenges this incarnate God, the scientific socialist state. Towards the creation of such a state and such a world order, Marxists, Fabian socialists, the advocates of welfare democracy, and others work. Fascism is a variation of the same faith. Fifth, Since God is both the author of liberty and the source of predestination, the modern God state must be the same. Modern man questions God. He sees freedom and predestination from God as a contradiction because he denies God. In the modern state, Hegel said, quote, "The contradiction between liberty and necessity vanishes," end quote. All things are reconciled in God, and for modern man, this state is God walking on earth. Sixth, Hegel said, quote, "This state is the universal spiritual life to which individuals by birth sustain a relation of confidence and habit, and in which they have their existence and reality," end quote. In other words, we live and move and have our being in this state. Given this premise, the modern state has moved to control every area of life and thought as a necessary part of its providential government. This is, of course, totalitarianism. Seventh, Hegel reduced personal freedom to a subjective matter. Quote, "In view of this, substantial, objective freedom must be distinguished from subjective freedom. Substantial freedom is the abstract, undeveloped reason implicit in volition proceeding to develop itself in the state. But in this phase of reason, there is still wanting personal insight and will, that is, subjective freedom, which is realized only in the individual in his own conscience." End quote. In church and state conflicts of the 1970s and 1980s, it has become apparent that the state's definition of religious freedom is Hegelian and subjective. Its area of freedom is restricted to the realm between one's two ears. In commenting on, quote, "the Greek world," end quote, Hegel began, quote, "Among the Greeks we feel ourselves immediately at home, for we are in the region of spirit," end quote. His maudlin rhapsodies over the Greeks are amazing reading. Some scholars reject the continuity with Hegel in modern jurisprudence and in political thought on the premise that Hegel's approach was metaphysical, whereas contemporary thinking is not. However, by refusing to teach or think metaphysically, we do not thereby escape it. Rather, we make our metaphysical presupposition naively and with the illusion of scientific truth. Legal positivism is Hegelian in ancestry and spirit. The positivists see no reason, right, or truth apart from the state. Chief Justice Holmes was an example of such thinking. Such positivism, as McClellan has shown, allows no ground for distinguishing between a just law and an unjust law, a good civil government and an evil one. Quote, "An ally of utilitarianism, legal positivism first took root in Germany. Hans Kelsen, who with Rudolf Stammer founded the Neo-Kantian school of jurisprudence, represented every tenet of the traditional conception of rule of law as a metaphysical superstition. A state, he insisted, could not act, quote, illegally, end quote, because, quote, every expression of the life of a state, every act of the state is a legal act, end quote. I have cited Kelsen with more than a little interest. In The Politics of Guilt and Pity, 1970, I analysed Kelsen critically. Those portions of the book had been written in the late 1950s, I believe. In the late 1960s, I at times referred to Kelsen in various speaking engagements. My only response was a rebuke from one church for criticising a great scholar of the law who knew more about law than I would ever know. Also, why was I wasting time commenting on law instead of dealing with quote-unquote spiritual matters? At the same time, my comments about the dangers of humanism in the 1950s and 1960s were incurring rebukes from pastors who saw no harm in it. Since then, the number of churchmen who are alarmed over humanism has become legion. We can therefore hope that in the time these men will awaken to the fact that the modern state claims to be an incarnate God with a total right to rule over them. Sovereignty means lordship, and the pagan and anti-Christian state has always claimed sovereignty.